In the last mini lecture, we had taken a look at Congress specifically, and we had then broken that down and begun to look a little bit about things like constituencies and the way House and senators might have to run for constituencies. We looked at the trustee and the delegate model, and we looked at some of the differences between the House and the Senate. And we had finished last time by looking at the senatorial election cycle. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to start taking a look a little bit more in depth at elections, but really just enough to kind of see how they play out in congressional politics, because we're going to have a whole other section on elections itself, right? And so to start with, we need to understand House districts. Now, why do we start with House districts? That's because members of the Senate don't have a district, right? There are 2 senators per state. So the district is straightforward. It's the state. But what about all those House members? How do they end up getting a constituency? And that's what we need to start with here. And there are 2 really big terms you're going to need to understand in order to do this. The first one is reapportionment, and the second is redistricting. So we'll talk about each of these in turn. Reapportionment, which you're always redoing it because you've only done it once. You've apportioned and then you're always reapportioning. But reapportionment or apportionment is to determine how many House members any particular state is going to receive. Now, the number of House members is determined by the size of the state or the size of the district. So you can gain or lose members on the basis of how big or how small your district is. The second concept, redistricting or districting, is to determine the boundaries. So what will actually be the edges, right? So if you're out in, say, in Tennessee and your state looks something like, well, this is not going to be perfect, but something like this, how do we decide inside of this, these borders? That's redistricting. So we have reapportionment, which is trying to decide how big or how small, or excuse me, how big or how many members you're going to have in a particular state, and that's going to be on the basis of the size. And the second is redistricting, which is the boundaries. Now, there's a really important act. It's called the Permanent Apportionment Act of 1929. And what makes it such a big deal is that the Permanent Apportionment Act caps the number of House members that there'll be. So the House is, and will be, unless this act is ever changed, 435 large. That means there are 435 possible seats in the entire United States to win as a House member. This means that when we reapportion, it's a zero-sum game. And the best way to think about a zero-sum game is it's poker. Right? So in poker, if there are 4 people playing and they've all bought in for $10 each, right? So everybody's got their chips at the table. If at the end of a given hand, if one of the players now has $15, that means the other 3 players in some combination here have to have lost $15, right? So these guys here have to have lost $5 for this guy to now have $15. That's a zero-sum game. It means somebody winning means somebody else is losing. So if one state gets another of the 435 members, that means another state is going to be down one of the 435 members. So currently in the state of Florida, we have 27 House members. Now, if at the next census we end up having a bigger population and we get more and we move to 28, that means another state somewhere has lost a member. Okay? Now, the boundaries, and that's the redistricting part, are determined by state legislatures. And they can take on all kinds of weird shapes and sizes to try to fit approximately the right number of people in. But they can also have weird lines in order to try to monkey it so that one party or one racial category will have a better district than another. And this actually has a name, and it comes from this picture right here, and it's called gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is when you draw lines in a way to blatantly help one party to the detriment of another. And it actually gets its name from this very map because what ends up happening in 1812, there's a cartoon making fun of the governor in Massachusetts. His name was Albridge Gerry, and he signed a bill to create this odd-looking district. And the artist shaded it and had the eyes and the wings. And he tells us, I found a new creature of lizard, the gerrymander, named after Albridge Gerry. And the name has stuck, and it's amazing ever since. So when you're drawing these lines, now up until the 1960s, there are no rules requiring districts to look in a certain way. As a matter of fact, even into the 1930s, there are going to be some districts in New York and parts of New York State which are 10 times the size of other districts. Now, in the 60s, though, there's going to be a couple of important cases, and we're going to look at two. The first is Wesbury v. Sanders, and the second is the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and both of these are going to do some important things. Now, Wesbury v. Sanders is a Supreme Court case, and in it, what the Supreme Court rules is that every state has to adhere to the one person equals one vote rule. That means that my vote has to be comparable to the vote of anybody else in the United States. And they don't mean this in any other kind of sense, but a mathematical sense. So let's assume that we had two different districts. And in one district, there's only 100 people, right? And in another district, there's 1 million people. Now, the problem with this is which vote counts more? Well, if I'm voting in the first district, my vote counts 1 over 100, or it's 1/100th of the determining factor of who's going to be the next House member. But in the second district, mine's only 1/1,000,000th. So you'll see that the right hand is far greater than the left hand is far greater than the right hand, and that violates the principles of Wesbury v. Sanders. One person, one vote means we need to have districts that are approximately equal. Or, in this case, in the United States, it means your vote's going to be, each district is going to be about 700,000 people. So that, regardless of where you're voting, it's approximately equal. Now, the second really important thing that happens is the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And the Voting Rights Act says that you can't discriminate on the basis of race or language. In other words, you can't create districts that are going to harm different kinds of minorities in different ways. So you have to have the principle of one person, one vote, and you can't harm specifically minorities as you create House districts. So now let's go through for a moment and take a look at the structure of the House. And that's what we're going to finish off with here. We're going to take a look at the structure of the House and the Senate. And the next time, we're going to move on to taking a look at how a bill actually becomes law. Now, at the top of the House leadership is the Speaker of the House. And the Speaker of the House is the person who kind of manages it. And it's actually the only leadership role formally found in the Constitution for the House. And it's found in Article 1, Section 2, which is, you might imagine, a big deal. I said we're going to keep coming back to the Constitution over and over again. The Speaker is elected by the House, meaning the House itself, the body, has its own election. So as you might imagine, the Speaker is always a member of the majority party, because the majority party always has the most votes in the House. The other interesting thing about the Speaker is that they're elected every 2 years at the very first session of the House, because again, this changes every 2 years, as we've already learned. And the Speaker of the House is actually third in line in the event that both the President and the Vice President become incapacitated or killed to become the next President of the United States. Now, underneath the Speaker of the House, you have the Majority Leader. And the Majority Leader is the committee coordinator, the majority representative. And they're the ones who are going to be managing kind of the day-to-day affairs of what's going to be happening for the House. Below that, you have a bunch of majority whips. And as the name might kind of sound, these are the people who actually, they whip up the vote. They're supposed to go around and say, look, you've got to make this happen. Kind of not exactly twist arms, although sometimes twist arms, to get the party to vote together on the things that matter the most. So that's the basic outline for the House. Over in the Senate, the highest ranking officer in the Senate, interestingly enough, is the Vice President. The Constitution actually assigns the Vice President the role of chairing the Senate. However, in modern times, the Vice President actually hasn't done this. And this actually comes from Article 1, Section 3 of the Constitution. And Vice Presidents will do this less and less and less until eventually in the 1950s, they don't do it anymore at all. As a matter of fact, presidents today don't do that. Gore hasn't done it. Biden most recently hasn't done it. And so instead, in the absence of the Vice President, the Senate has a President pro tempore. And this is the individual who who chairs the Senate the way that the majority leader in the House does in the absence, which is always, of the Vice President. Now, underneath this, you have the majority leaders, which will function just like they do in the House, and you have the majority whips, who also function the same way that they do in the House. So, you get the Vice President. Now, if you start watching some of this on video, and we'll have some of these videos up online, and you'll oftentimes see senators say things like, Mr. President, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, or we should do this. They're not actually referring to the President of the United States. They're referring to the President pro tempore, who is chairing the session in the absence of the Vice President. So just keep that in mind, because one of the things that all kinds of parliamentary rules require is that you never actually talk to the person sitting next to you. So I'd never say, oh, Jane Doe is an idiot. I'd say, look, the representative from Tennessee's ideas are bad. Right, and that's parliamentary procedure. Now, the other thing that we have to understand is that the House and the Senate are designed to function through committee. You can't understand Congress without understanding committees. It's impossible. And they do some really big things. They screen, they specialize, and they offer re-election. And I'll go through this quickly. The committees, they screen all the bills that are coming through, right? So in any particular Congress, there's going to be tons and tons, thousands of bills that are coming through, and some are pretty good, some are horrendous, and some are somewhere in between. And so what committees can do is determine, okay, should this come through or not? They're a screening device. They're a way of allowing only certain things to make it to the floor. Now, other kinds of things can happen, but that's the design. The second thing they're designed to do is specialize. Now, imagine if I said to you, look, You're going to be a congressman, and you've just been elected. Woohoo! Now we have this trade issue. We're not sure if syrup being imported from Canada into the United States violates our import laws and our trade embargoes on sugar because it's actually supersized, it's actually supercharged maple syrup. And your answer is, what in the ever-loving world are you talking about, right? And the answer is, don't think that somebody who gets elected to the House or to the Senate is going to immediately know this either. And that's actually a real case. There was this interesting question. We have really high tariffs on sugar. That's why sugar is so expensive in the United States. And it was actually cheaper for this company to supercharge it into syrup, haul it across the border as syrup, which does not have high trade barriers, and then to unprocess the sugar out of it. So if you're in a committee for a long time, though, you're going to kind of learn about these issues. And so if I'm not sure about something and you're on, the Foreign Relations Committee and we're in the same party, I can go to you and say, hey, what's the deal with this bill? Give me the rundown. I don't understand. So this offers an opportunity for specialization. And then the third thing is re-election. We're going to see, and you've been reading about Mayhew and the desire to want to re-elect. As a matter of fact, Mayhew even posits that we can predict all of the behavior of congressmen through positing that they can be reelected, or that they want to get reelected. And committees are no different. It offers you a chance to be in areas that are important to your state in ways to get bills done that will make you seem positive. Now, there are some committees everybody would like to be on. For instance, in the House, the Rules Committee is the killer committee. But we'll talk about that a little bit more. So committees are designed to screen, specialize, and re-elect. Now, there's some different types of committees. We're going to take a look at this, and then we're going to take a look at the standing committees in each, and then we're going to pause there. There are four major types of committees. You have standing committees, you have select committees, you have joint committees, and you have conference committees. Now, the ones that we're going to focus the most in on an introductory class like this are standing committees and conference committees. And let's talk about which each of these do. Standing committees are the ones that are set up permanently by rule. That means that they always exist, and they are the first stop for all new legislation. So you have a bill, and we want to screen all that kind of stuff we were talking about, it's going to head to a standing committee. And there's a number of them for both the House and for the Senate. The ratio of party members on any committee is set through a process of negotiation between the majority and the minority parties. But the majority party will always have a majority on each committee and control the chair. Now, almost all standing committees are also broken down into subcommittees. Now this starts to get a little bit beyond what we want to do, but you should at least be familiar that standing committees have subcommittees, and as a matter of fact, some of these subcommittees have subcommittees, and that things can get a little more complicated, but we'll focus on the standing committees just as a whole. Now, the next kind of committee that we're going to take a look at are select committees. Select committees are temporary committees, and they're just designed to conduct a study or an investigation on some topic. The end. They don't have any power to send or receive bills like the standing committees did. Joint committees, our third type, are committees with members from both the House and the Senate, and they're designed to facilitate the flow of legislation through both. It's kind of the beginning of the legislation process, and we want to kind of both chambers on the same page. That's a joint committee. But the second most important and the fourth kind of committee that we're going to take a look at are conference committees. Conference committees iron the difference out between differing versions of bills in the House and the Senate. So it's a way of reconciling bills. In this case, between the House and the Senate. Because for a bill to become law, we're going to see, it ultimately has to go through both the House and the Senate in identical forms. And if it's not going through in identical forms, they can bounce back and forth a number of times. The only way to get around this is a conference committee, which is where you have members from both the House and the Senate. They come together and they work on a bill that can go through both, right? And that happens at the end of the legislative process. Now, like I said, we're going to be focusing on the standing and conference committees, and I just want to show you, you don't need to write all of these down, the House standing and the Senate standing, so you can kind of see some of the things that happen: agriculture, appropriations, transportation and infrastructure, judiciary, and all of these then have subcommittees that deal with something underneath this. The only one that I will want you to point out here and kind of keep in your mind for our introductory class is the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee is the most powerful committee in the House, and we'll talk about why a little bit later on. And then here are some of our Senate committees, and you'll see that they're going to deal with more things because there's fewer people. So agriculture, nutrition, and forestry, or banking, housing, and urban affairs, or health, education, labor, and pension, or environment and public works. So you'll see they'll have a lot more things. There is no most powerful Senate committee per se, the way that the House has the Rules Committee. So we're going to pause here. We've taken a look at the organizational structure of Congress a little bit. And next time we're going to take a look at the lawmaking process.